tax revenue at least as best as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think SARS still, raises the flag and waves the flag to some extent. They are one of our finer institutions. I think they're a world-class organisation who know how to collect revenue. Although we've got this hole, it's not because of their lack of collection, it's just because of the growth, the stagnant growth of the economy.
Okay, let's leave on that positive note, but now let's go here. Which taxes, what's going to happen? Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan about to give his budget speech 2017.
We'll read the order of the day.
Introduction, Appropriation Bill, and the tabling of the Division of Revenue Bill.
The Honorable, the Minister of Finance.
Yo.
Siyabulela, tata, siyabulela. Siyabulela. Sicela ukuqhubeka nomsebenzi wendlu. The Honorable, the Minister, please proceed.
Honorable Speaker, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, Cabinet colleagues, and Deputy Ministers, the Governor and Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, the MECs for Finance, and fellow South Africans. Sanbonani, Molweni, Goeiemiddag, Tobela, Dumelang, Absheni, Saubenani, Indima C. Ari, Lochani. Good afternoon. Before I proceed, Madam Speaker, on your behalf and with your consent, I wish to recognize two schools, apparently, that have been invited by yourselves for their spectacular pass rates. The first one looks very suspicious because it's from Kala, and I see the Secretary General in the audience there. And this senior secondary school in 2015 had a 92% matric pass rate, and in 2016 received the MEC award, and there's an individual amongst them, N. Atinkonsi, who received the MEC award and is currently studying at the UCT. And secondly, the Masibambisani High School from Delft in Cape Town. Can you congratulate them for being here, please? Honourable Speaker, I have the privilege to present our government's budget for the fiscal year 2017-18 and the framework for the next 3 years. I am mindful of the context of our own transformation challenges and the stresses in the global environment, which remind me of Oliver Tambo's unwavering vision, and I quote, "We seek to create a united, democratic, and non-racial society. We have a vision of South Africa in which black and white shall live and work together as equals in conditions of peace and prosperity. We seek to remake our part of the world into a corner of the globe of which all of humanity can be proud," end of quote. In the words similarly of the Freedom Charter, South Africa belongs to all who live in it. And in drafting our Constitution, This was a central foundational principle, and the values of freedom, dignity, and equality are embedded in our law and in our polity. This is also why our Constitution requires that all who live in our country, and that's all who live in our country, should have access to housing, medical care, social security, water, and education. There should be a progressive realization of access to tertiary education and other elements in a comprehensive set of social entitlements. Wealth and economic opportunities must be equitably shared. These commitments impose an obligation on government, but also on other role players and stakeholders in society. These realities, or some of these realities, we are familiar with, but let us state the reality of life in South Africa. Wealth remains highly concentrated. 95% of wealth is in the hands of 10% of the population. 35% of the labor force are unemployed or have given up hope of finding work. Despite our progress in education, over half of all children in grade 5 cannot yet read adequately in any language. More than half of all school leavers each year enter the labor market without a senior certificate pass. 75% of these will still be unemployed 5 years later. Our towns and cities remain divided, spatially and otherwise, and poverty is concentrated in townships, informal settlements, and rural areas. Our growth has been too slow, just 1% a year in real per capita terms over the past 25 years, well below that of countries such as Brazil, Turkey, Indonesia, India, and China. These are our realities. These are the realities that we must seek to transform and change. They mirror the stresses of poverty and vulnerability in many developing countries and the inequality between rich and poor throughout the world. Even in the developed world, there are fault lines and high levels of uncertainty today. Citizens lack trust in elites, and that includes, as I've always said, all of us. Growing inequality in societies both developed and developing. Globalization is benefiting only a few, the top 1% or 10%. Stagnant and falling incomes are the fate of the middle classes in many parts of the world. These, among other factors, are also a case for radical transformation of economic models and a call for inclusive growth both here and elsewhere in the world. The President has rightly emphasized requirements for transformation and change in South Africa are wide-ranging. Just give me a minute. Laws and regulations, policies and their implementation, initiatives of national and provincial and local governments, our Black economic empowerment charters and the engagement of business, organized labor and civil society partners are all critical levers of change, and so is our budget. This is not a transformation to be achieved through conquest, conflict, or extortion as in our past. We do not seek to reproduce the racial divides and racial domination that was the hallmark of apartheid nationalism. Our transformation will be built through economic participation, partnerships and mobilization of all of our capacities. It is a transformation that must unite, not divide South Africans. This is the task entrusted to us by our leaders such as Oliver Tambo, Helen Joseph, Walter Sisulu, and Nelson Mandela. We find ourselves at a conjuncture which requires the wisdom of our elders to help us make the right choices and keep the trust of our citizens. Madam Speaker, today's budget message is that we are once again at a crossroads. Tough choices have to be made to achieve the development outcomes that we seek. As I pointed out, our economic growth is slow, unemployment is far too high, and many businesses and families are under stress. We face an uncertain and complex environment. At the same time, we face immense transformational challenges. We must overcome the inequalities and divisions of our society, and all South Africans must have a prosperous future. We have a plan for a more inclusive and shared economy. Its implementation requires greater urgency, however, and effective collaboration amongst all social partners. Change, of course, is difficult and often contested. In these tough times, we draw strength from the resilience and the diverse capabilities of our people, our business sector, our trade unions, and our social formations. Key features of the framework for the 2017 budget include the following. Expenditure envelope projected in last year's budget and at the MTBPS. An additional 28 billion rands will be raised in taxes. In a moment how it affects you. The budget deficit for 2017-18 will be 3.1% of GDP with our fiscal consolidation commitments, and government debt will stabilize at about 48 to 49% of GDP over the next year. Redistribution in support of education services and municipal functions remain the central thrust of our spending programs. Government's wage bill has stabilized. Procurement reforms continue to improve the effectiveness of public spending and opening opportunities for small business participation. Our state-owned companies and financial institutions play a substantial role in infrastructure investing and financing development. Their borrowing requirements are taken into account in the overall fiscal framework that we present. As in past years, honourable members, the budget review and the estimates of national expenditure provide extensive details of developments in the economy, our fiscal and budget plans, and the programs and activities of government departments and public entities. Madam Speaker, allow me to comment briefly on the international economic outlook. After several years of tentative economic growth, there are signs that a more sustainable economy might be underway. Growth in the United States and Europe is steady, although at low levels. India and China remain comparatively buoyant, and economies such as Russia and Brazil are set to recover from their respective recessions. The IMF projects that the world economy will grow at 3.4% in 2017 and 3.5% in 2018. Still very modest growth. Many countries face the challenge of ensuring that as growth picks up, its benefits accrue to all in society. In the 2008 financial crisis and its aftermath, exposed deep fault lines in the world economy and in the distribution of income. Economic recovery has been slow. In several countries affected by unrest or war, there has been great hardships and dislocation of people, as we well know. The impact of trends in trade, technology, and commodity markets has been uneven across the world. These forces have heightened social and political pressures for change. Global strains manifest in various ways, honourable members, including the rise of strident economic nationalism and protectionist policies. Government and business leaders throughout the world have had to reflect on the deficit of trust and loss of social solidarity in their societies. Policies and programs that strengthen economic inclusion are being prioritized everywhere in the world. In the words of Pope Francis, and I quote, "Reforming the social structures which perpetuate poverty and the exclusion of the poor first requires a conversion of mind and heart." Close quotation. We require a similar conversion of heart and mind. We therefore welcome Germany's commitment to highlight Africa and its infrastructure financing requirements as a priority in its term as chair of the G20 countries. On the question of South Africa's economy, our expectation at this stage is that GDP growth will increase from 0.5% in the past year to 1.3% in 2017, and will continue to improve very moderately over the medium term. Clearly, these numbers are too low and highly inadequate. The services sector was the main contributor to growth in 2016, bringing nearly 120,000 new work opportunities to the table. Mining continued to underperform, while manufacturing output was supported by buoyant sales in petrochemicals, food and beverages, and motor vehicles. Mining and manufacturing employment declined by 80,000 jobs in 2016. Weak business confidence and low levels of profitability weighed on investment across all sectors. Though the policy interest rate has increased by 2 percentage points since 2014, inflation ended the year above target. The food prices continuing to reflect the impact on agriculture of poor rainfall. Lower growth amongst our trading partners in Africa and elsewhere has contributed to sluggish export performance. We expect somewhat higher growth in the coming year on the strength of a number of favorable trends that are emerging. Commodity prices have rebounded, and hopefully they stay that way. The exchange rate has recovered from its rapid depreciation last year, which bodes well for capital flows, inflation, and business and consumer confidence. Drought conditions have abated in most of the country. Production stoppages associated with industrial disputes have been comparatively low, and electricity supply has improved, allowing new connections and industrial demand to be accommodated. But the projected rate of growth is not sufficient to reduce unemployment or impact significantly on poverty and inequality. It falls well short of our NDP targets. Madam Speaker, we know what to do to get ourselves out of the present low growth trap. Now listen carefully to this. Ditau Khedi Shumshisana Dikha Bulaya Nare. If lions work as a team, they will bring down even a buffalo. Shumishan. And we've got to be, honorable members, lions with all types of T-shirts on to bring the buffalo down. In order to boost investment in the short term, there are several specific imperatives. Finalizing legislation relating to mining development and land redistribution, implementing the transition from analog to digital television, which will release spectrum for broadband services, which Minister Kwele is anxiously waiting for, continuing our independent power producer program, both in renewables and to take advantage of gas investment opportunities, further strengthening of economic regulatory functions and streamlining investment approval processes. That's well on its way. Production-friendly industrial relations and prompt resolution of disputes that the Deputy President has been working on, an enabling environment for small enterprises, and support through leveraging both private and public sector procurement budgets, work that Minister Zulu is doing. Focused support on labor-intensive sectors of the economy, including agriculture, agro-processing, and tourism-related services. Strengthening regional ties and trade links, and safeguarding South Africa's investment-grade credit rating, which will be an issue once again this year. The 2017 budget, Madam Speaker, allocates funds over the MTF period to support economic growth in various programs. 3.9 billion rands for small, medium, and micro enterprises and cooperatives, 4.2 billion rands for industrial infrastructure in special economic zones and industrial parks, 1.9 billion rands for broadband implementation, 3.9 billion rands for the CSIR, an additional 494 million for tourism promotion, an additional 266 million to support the aquaculture sector and realize the goals of the oceans economy, Pakisa operation, and spending on agriculture, rural development, and land reform amounting to nearly 30 billion rands by 2019-2020. Effective implementation of these and other programs and initiatives will set us on a higher growth trajectory than currently projected. Progress in engagements between government, the business sector, trade unions, and social partners generally is imperative. To achieve sustained higher growth, there are also more fundamental and more radical transformation measures that are needed. These relate in particular to the way in which economic power is distributed in our society. The relationships between labor and capital, between rich and poor, black and white, men and women, town and township, urban and rural, still reflect the entrenched legacy of colonialism and apartheid. Wealth is produced and allocated along lines that remain fundamentally unjust. The ownership of assets and the distribution of income is captured by a minority of the population, a situation that is both morally wrong and economically unsustainable. We agree with the President that a new perspective on economic transformation is required. The principles that should guide our agenda, we suggest, for transformation include the following. The litmus test of our programs must be what do they do to create jobs, eliminate poverty, and narrow the inequality gap. Transformation must be mass-based, benefiting the most disadvantaged South Africans through the creation of new assets, capabilities, and opportunities to build real livelihoods. We have to mobilize both private and public sector investment in social and economic infrastructure, new technologies, and new activities that help build a modern and diversified economy. We must continue to confront cartels and collusion robustly and provide new opportunities for access to markets. Transformation must reshape our cities and the spatial arrangements we live in, and build linkages across rural and urban landscapes, where fragmentation and separation characterized past patterns. Transformation must achieve a more balanced structure of ownership and control in our economy. Transformation should also build on and strengthen democracy, entrench open, transparent governance, and the rule of law. Transformation must build self-reliance of South Africans and reject the dependence on debt and protect our fiscal sovereignty, which is quite crucial. It must also result in an economy that belongs to all, black and white, where the legacy of racial domination is no longer visible. In 1969, the ANC resolved, and I quote, "Our nationalism must not be confused with chauvinism or narrow nationalism of a previous epoch. It must not be confused with the classical drive by an elitist group among the oppressed people to gain ascendancy so that they can replace the oppressor in the exploitation of the masses," quote, quotation. Transformation must unleash growth. It must establish a new economic direction, mobilize investment, empower the masses, and create new resources for social change. Of course, we still have a long way to go, but we're very aware of what we have to do. Let me turn to fiscal policy and the budget framework that we present today. Madam Speaker, the 2017 budget reflects a balance between maintaining our spending commitments and ensuring long-term health of the public finances. And that's the responsibility that the public has given us. Slow economic growth has held us back, and so decisive steps are needed to strengthen confidence, investment, and growth. Acting too quickly to reduce the deficit would harm service delivery, delay economic recovery, and compromise tax revenue collection. But to ignore our fiscal targets would result in interest rate hikes, unsustainable commitments, and credit rate downgrades. This is a scenario in which short-term gains would quickly give way to financial stress, capital flight, and cutbacks in service delivery. To ensure a balanced and sustainable recovery, we indicated in the medium-term budget policy statement that we will raise an additional 28 billion rands in tax revenues. We also need to reduce spending by a total of 26 billion rands over the next 2 years. The proposed expenditure for 2017-18 totals 1.56 trillion rands. Interest on debt amounts to 169 billion rands. So that's the interest that we're paying on 2.2 trillion rands worth of debt presently. And that begins to push out the kind of expenditure we want to undertake both on social services and on economic support. Projected revenue in this financial year or the coming financial year amounts to 1.4 trillion rands. The balance of 149 billion, or 3.1% of GDP, is the amount we need to borrow in 2017-2018. Let me repeat that. 149 billion rands needs to be borrowed in the year 2017-2018. Government debt now stands at 2.2 trillion rands, or about 50% of GDP. Interest payments are a rising share of expenditure, as I've just indicated, and by acting now to stabilize debt, we will ensure that future generations will not pay for today's expenses some 20 or 30 years hence. Over the medium term, expenditure on public services will continue to grow moderately above inflation. A substantial additional allocation to higher education is again proposed, adding 5 billion rands to the 32 billion rands previously announced. I thought Minister Nzimande will jump up a little bit. We will, of course, he's got a partner in the president these days. We will continue to safeguard expenditure that protects poor households. It is only right that if households and firms face tough choices in balancing their income and expenses, the same disciplines must be applied in public expenditure as well. In other words, that which we expect the public to do, we in government must also do. Citizens must rightly demand accountability to ensure public funds are used for the intended purposes. Honourable Speaker, I have received a variety of tips, not in the form of money, from members of the public. Ms. Fori wrote, and I quote, "I still wonder why we do not have tax as a subject in school. Perhaps the government should educate people from a young age about tax so that they will have an understanding that there is no government without taxpayers." Quite right, Ms. Fori. So having said that we will spend 1.56 trillion rands and that we will borrow 149 billion rands, where does the rest of the money come from? It comes from taxes, and where does the 28 billion rand increase in taxes come from? So for many years, honourable members, we have enjoyed the benefit of tax revenue collections outstripping economic growth. This contributed to our capacity to expand public service delivery. This year, revenue has lagged behind the economy, leading to a 30 billion rand shortfall by comparison with budget estimates a year ago. The revenue shortfall is mainly in personal income tax, value-added tax, and customs duties. This reflects, on the one hand, slower growth in wages, employment, and bonus payouts last year, and other factors as well. Our current expectation is that the total tax revenue for 16-17, as I indicated earlier, will be 1.14 trillion rands, which is an increase of 7% on the previous year. The tax proposals this year will raise an additional 28 billion rands by comparison with revenue estimates based on full adjustment of personal income tax and excise duties for inflation. The main tax proposals are, honourable members, a new top personal income tax rate of 45% for those with taxable incomes above 1.5 million rands. I thought you'll clap for that. Because this is what you call progressive taxation. Those who earn more pay more. An increase in the dividend withholding tax rate from 15% to 20%, a limited bracket creep relief, increasing the tax-free threshold from 75,000 to 75,750 rands, an increase of 30 cents per litre in the general fuel levy, and 9 cents per litre in the road accident fund levy. Increases, this is the most important part for some of you, increases in the excise duties for alcohol and tobacco of between 6% and 10%. Relief will be provided in the affordable housing market, and this is an important measure we are taking to support people in the middle income groups through an increase in the threshold above which transfer duty is paid, or put it the other way, in the past, if you bought a house for 750,000 rands or less, no transfer duty was paid, and as the new tax year starts, if you buy a house for 900,000 rands and less, no transfer duty is to be paid. I've been asked by Minister Sisulu to communicate the following, that property owners must endeavor to retain ownership of their assets, particularly at the lower income groups, for much longer than they do, in order that over time those assets will appreciate and help in the creation of wealth. It's a message we need to send out to all South Africans. The annual allowance for tax-free accounts will be increased to 33,000 from 30,000 rands. The medical tax credit will be increased in line with inflation this year. It should be noted that consideration is being given to possible reductions in this subsidy in the future as part of the financing framework for the new national health insurance. Further consultations are currently taking place on the other matter that concerns some of you, on the tax on sugary beverages. Arising from these discussions and working closely with the Department of Health, the proposed design has been revised to include both what are called intrinsic and added sugars. The tax will be implemented later this year once details are finalized and the legislation is passed by yourselves. The proposed carbon tax and its date of implementation will be considered later this year by Parliament. On the question of combating tax avoidance, or ducking taxes, if you put it in simple language, multinational corporations continue to use inconsistencies in global tax rules to their advantage and to avoid tax liabilities. In fact, you have many multinational corporations that are residing in 150 or 200 countries and end up paying very little or no tax to any country. South Africa intends to sign a multilateral instrument this year which will assist in the updating of treaties and will reduce the scope for aggressive tax avoidance activities. Applications to the Special Voluntary Disclosure Program have once again been initiated. SARS has already received disclosures of 3.8 billion rands in foreign assets, which will yield revenue of about 600 million rands. So if any of you have friends or family that have assets outside that they haven't disclosed, here's an opportunity to come forward to SARS and declare your monies. The program, please note, will be open until the end of August this year. The automatic exchange of information between tax authorities will come into operation in September this year. Honourable members, this is a very important development, where in the past, tax authorities of different countries had the option to either give information or not give information. Part of the international campaign against base erosion and profit shifting is that automatically countries, once requested, must provide information on a taxpayer that is operating in another jurisdiction whilst being investigated by, for example, our jurisdiction. That's a very important measure. Multinational companies will be required to file further information with SARS on cross-border activities from the end of the year. We will continue to work actively with the international tax community and within government to modernize customs administration combat cross-border revenue leakages, money laundering, and harmful tax practices. Honourable members, an efficient and trusted tax administration is one of South Africa's institutional strengths. SARS has played an integral role in building the democratic state by ensuring that expected levels of revenue are available to fund spending programs. SARS must continue to develop the skills and capacity needed to enforce legislation and strengthen its efforts to curb tax avoidance and evasion and address transfer pricing, a component of illicit financial flows. Madam Speaker, I have requested the Davis Tax Committee last year to advise on an appropriate governance and accountability model for SARS. This was last done in 1994 by the Katz Commission. Some of you have been around since then, so you will remember. In the context of the envisaged Border Management Agency, Customs and Excise Administration has come under review. These are integral functions of our revenue system, and the Davis Committee has advised that it would be imprudent to fragment customs administration and customs duty collections. I agree with this, particularly in light of SARS's ongoing customs modernization program, which is critical to both our revenue and trade policy imperatives. I want to express my appreciation to the Deputy President and Minister Gigaba for the ongoing engagement on this matter. Continued strengthening of the capacity of SARS and enhancing its relationship with taxpayers is vital to our fiscal health. We will continue to call on Judge Davis and the Tax Committee for advice on how best to ensure that SARS remains a robust and effective collection agency. On the division of revenue, which is what is required of us by our Constitution, Honourable members, our Constitution requires an equitable division of revenue between the spheres of government and sets out the criteria that govern this division. The funds available after providing for debt service costs and a contingency reserve increased by 6.9% to 1.24 trillion next year, and is expected to rise to 1.43 trillion in 2019-2020. Over the next 3 years, 47.5% of available funds are allocated to national government and departments, 43.4% to provinces, and 9.1% to local government. The division of revenue involves a substantial redistribution of resources from the wealthiest areas in our country, where most of our taxes are raised, to lower income communities and households. The allocations to predominantly rural municipalities are twice as large per household than those to metropolitan councils. The redistribution of resources is an enabling foundation for a broader transformation of services and opportunities in our cities, towns, and rural areas. Development also requires effective management of public services and promotion of enterprises and income-generating activities. As far as provincial financial management is concerned, let me share with you that in the context of our constrained fiscal environment, provinces have already made progress in reducing spending on non-core goods and services and in controlling personnel costs, and they need to be congratulated for their work. Which means national departments, you've got to catch up with them. Spending on non-essential goods and services fell in real terms by 7.1% in 2014-15, 6.1% in 15-16, and is anticipated to decline by 4.5% annually over the medium term. The proportion of provincial spending on personnel has declined to just under 60% in 2016-17, freeing up more resources to invest in services. Provinces have also, it's okay, you can do it, wake up your neighbors. Provinces have also put their public entities under review to eliminate duplication of activities and ensure effective governance and clear development mandates. 3 new conditional grants will take effect in 2017-18. They will expand access to early childhood development and improve facilities, provide for increased employment of social workers, and improve opportunities for learners with profound disabilities. The Auditor General has called for stronger leadership within provinces to remedy financial management challenges. Better cash management is needed to ensure suppliers are paid on time. Improved oversight is needed to curb unauthorized expenditure. And there must be adherence to the procurement rules to limit irregular expenditure. As far as municipalities are concerned, government continues to invest in improving the financial capability of municipalities. In the period ahead, National Treasury and Provincial Treasuries have agreed to focus their efforts on 4, hopefully, game changers. The first is the new Municipal Standard Chart of Accounts, which will be implemented from 1 July 2017, contributing to greater transparency and consistency of municipal finances. Secondly, targeted supply chain management interventions to achieve cost savings and combat fraud. Thirdly, enhanced revenue management, including appropriate tariff setting, regular billing, and effective collection systems, which is at the heart of good financial management at the municipal level. And lastly, improved asset management, including adherence to 8% of the value of assets being spent on their maintenance. In South Africa, we have this disease where we want to constantly put in new infrastructure while not spending enough money to maintain existing infrastructure. If we make progress in local financial management, we will transform the lives of millions of people across the country. Now, what is the relationship between the budget and the transformation that we require in our economy and society? Madam Speaker, the budget gives effect to our transformation action agenda by financing government programs which firstly ensure that many more people live in dignity every single year, radically improve access to services and economic participation across all racial lines, energize growth and create jobs, increase investment and development at national, provincial, and local level, mobilizing resources across government, business, and other sectors of our society. A growing economy makes more rapid transformation possible, but it is the fiscal system that is the most direct vehicle for redistribution and inclusivity. The South African budget finances the construction of houses and schools, the education of young people, care for the elderly, and incomes of the most vulnerable in our society. About 2/3 of the budget is dedicated to realizing social rights in South Africa, which is a huge achievement for all of us. We have programs that build infrastructure, support new businesses, empower small farmers, develop human capabilities, and incentivize job creation. The budget is already highly redistributive to the poor and the working families. But the budget alone cannot achieve our transformation goals. We need a powerful combination of effective and targeted government delivery of economic programs, an energetic coalition with labor, business, and civil society which acts together and in a synergistic way, a consensus amongst all of our social partners on a transformation program with each of us clear about the contribution and sacrifices we have to make to ensure optimal inclusivity of all of our people. A commitment to eradicate gross inequality and share the benefits of growth and restructuring of the economy across all of our people. Government can be, of course, an important catalyst, but it cannot carry all of the responsibility for ensuring that every citizen experiences a palpable and real change in wealth, in dignity, and in well-being. This has to be our collective choice as South Africans. So how do we develop or work towards a transformation action agenda? Transformation is in part about overcoming the legacy of exclusion and inequality of the past, but it is also about restructuring the economy to take advantage of new technologies, new forms of market access, and investment opportunities. It's about investing in social capabilities through better outcomes in health and education and skills development, and through inclusive and responsive institutions. Let me say clearly and emphatically, sound public finances, the health of our financial institutions, investment-grade credit ratings, and our competitive public procurement processes are all valued elements in the sustainability and integrity of our transformation path. In other words, without doing the right things financially, we can't go about implementing all the ambitions and programs we have. It just won't work. So also are the clarity of vision and the details of the sectoral priorities and programs set out in the National Development Plan. Radical transformation and inclusive growth touch many aspects of social organization and economic activity. Renewal and wider participation have to be opened up across as broad a range of industries and social formations as possible. The portfolio of every member of cabinet, every provincial MEC, and every member of mayoral committees, indeed all councillors, are involved, while responsibilities arise in business, every NGO, and every voluntary association in our communities. And we need to see progress rapidly. There's a growing impatience and ferment amongst our people. Can we channel this energy into constructive activism and productive collaboration is the question we have to answer. Allow me to emphasize 5 critical priorities in which government is committed to work with the private sector and other social partners to propel inclusive growth. Firstly, improved education is a central priority, and particularly the quality of basic literacy and numeracy achieved in the first phase of schooling. We must increase funding for proven interventions in this regard. Secondly, reform of technical and vocational education and training programs is vital so that they effectively meet the occupational and industrial needs of our economy. We must strengthen collaboration between employers and TVET colleges, as Minister Nzimande will ask. We must accelerate development of our cities, housing investment, improve public transport and urban enterprise and industrial development. South Africa's integration and linkages with its regional neighbors offer significant opportunities for enterprise growth, agricultural development, and new industrialists and industries. Reform of domestic market structures, promotion of competition, deconcentration of monopolized industries, public and private, and greater private sector participation in sectors that might be currently dominated by public enterprises will all benefit us at the end of the day. These are structural reforms which bring opportunities for business development, modernization, and a more balanced distribution of wealth and opportunities for all of our people. In regard to market concentration, honorable members, I need to commend the work of the competition authorities under Minister Patel's leadership. These are difficult regulatory issues that we've witnessed recently, particularly where the activities in question involve large institutions operating in internationally integrated and complex markets such as the financial markets. In the year ahead, the Department of Economic Development will finalize the establishment of the Terisano Fund to be financed from the construction sector settlement. It will boost much-needed skills amongst Black South Africans and support emerging enterprises in the construction sector. It's just water. Alcohol is too expensive now. An initial amount of 117 million rands is earmarked for the adjustments appropriation this year. If we transform competitive markets effectively, we will see more rapid growth. If we achieve faster growth, we will see greater transformation, enterprise development, and greater participation in the economy. As far as economic infrastructure and investment is concerned, Madam Speaker, the reform of state-owned companies is an especially important part of the restructuring and strengthening of our economy. State-owned enterprises or companies are governed by a strong legal framework, and Cabinet has endorsed a series of measures to reinforce and clarify governance and accountability and clarify their development mandates. This imposes substantial obligations and responsibilities on boards and senior managers in these companies. We expect the highest standards of ethical leadership and understanding. With a combined asset base of 1.2 trillion rands, these state-owned companies are well placed to partner with the private sector investors in growing the productive capacity and infrastructure of our economy. But they must be financially strong, governance must be sound, and boards and executives must have the necessary competencies to run complex business enterprises. Eskom and Transnet especially have large responsibilities as dominant suppliers in major network industries. Their investment programs are important foundations for more rapid economic growth. The South African Post Office is consolidating its mail services and expanding the role of the Post Bank, which will soon reach new levels of formality. PRASA is in the third year of its rolling stock fleet renewal program. The IDC, the Land Bank, and the Development Bank of Southern Africa are financially sound and are steadily expanding their financing of industry, agriculture, and municipal infrastructure. Last week, I met members of the board of South African Airways to discuss its turnaround plans. I am pleased to report, I am pleased to report that the challenges are well understood amongst the board, and the advisory work that is in progress has clarified the way forward. We've also had constructive discussions with the new leadership of the Post Office. During the next few months, proposals for putting the capital structure of SAA and the Post Office on a sound footing will need to be agreed upon. The capital injection will be appropriated in the adjustment budget in October. We will finance this in a deficit-neutral way. And honourable members, the budget continues to prioritize both national and provincial economic infrastructure requirements. The Provincial Roads Maintenance Grant is allocated 10.8 billion rands in 17-18, taking into account the increase in road traffic volumes. SANRAL receives 15.4 billion rands over the period ahead for strengthening and maintenance of the national road network, which now stands at almost 22,000 kilometers. The Department of Telecommunications and Postal Services receives almost 2 billion rands over the medium term to invest in high-speed internet connections in public buildings and schools and in 8 NHI pilot districts. PRASA also continues to implement its modernization and rolling stock renewal program, and over the medium term, some 16.7 billion rands is allocated for 70 new trains, or train sets as they call it, for Metro Rail. The development and operation of integrated public transport networks funded through the Public Transport Network Grant received some 6 billion rands in 2017-18. To support higher density housing, subsidies for social housing have been rationalized, and some 600 million rands over the medium term is reprioritized to the Social Housing Regulatory Authority for investment in rental housing units. Madam Sisulu. As far as city development and human settlements and municipal infrastructure is concerned, Madam Speaker, sustainable communities require strengthened intergovernmental cooperation between national government, provinces, and municipalities. Improved alignment in the delivery of services such as housing, water, sanitation, electrification, and public transport is central to achieving the objectives set out in the Integrated Urban Development Framework. 18.4 billion rands over the medium term is allocated to the Regional Bulk Infrastructure Grant and some 12.5 billion rands to the Water Services Infrastructure Grant. These allocations continue to prioritize water provision in the 27 most impoverished district municipalities. 1 billion rand is added to the local government equitable share in 2018-19 in view of the rising household numbers and infrastructure maintenance requirements. Last year, Madam Speaker, I reported on the progress being made by our metropolitan municipalities in reversing the spatial legacy of apartheid through targeted investment in high-density corridors linking townships back into our cities. The spatial transformation is a massive challenge involving land acquisition and development infrastructure and transport services, housing and industrial enterprise support. Much of this depends on collaboration between government and the private sector. We will continue to work with our cities to improve the safety and reliability of public transport services. Commuter rail currently provides for over 20% of all passengers carried into the cities. The budget provides resources to subsidize some 457 million rail passenger trips next year, as well as ongoing support to upgrade rolling stock and improve signaling systems. All our metropolitan municipalities are undertaking a portfolio of catalytic integrated urban development projects that will lead the way to reshaping our cities. Just to give you a few examples, in eThekwini, the Konuba mixed development node will yield 25,000 housing units, while over 13 billion rands in private sector investment in the nearby Dube trade port has been identified. A 30 billion rand inner city regeneration program is also underway. In Ekurhuleni, development along the corridor linking Tembisa to Kempton Park has been prioritized. In Cape Town, it has adopted a transit-oriented development strategy, including mixed-use development of the Belleville Transport Interchange, upgrade of the Philippi East Station Precinct, and the redevelopment of Athlone Power Station. In Mangaung, the airport development node is under construction, and 8,500 affordable housing units will be built in and around the inner city of Bloemfontein. In Johannesburg, there is further progress with the corridors of freedom linking Soweto, Alexandra, Sandton, and the CBD. This includes the new bridges that can be seen along the M1. We've also seen substantial investment in township precincts in response to the Neighborhood Development Partnership grant. 190 projects have been completed, and a further 55 are in construction. In the Jubatina, Alabama hub in Matlosana, for example, an NDP investment in transport and health facilities has been accompanied by commercial investment commitments of some 155 million rands. In the Solomon Mashlangu node in Swane, which serves over 500,000 people, a 1 billion rand public investment in roads, parks, trading facilities is expected to leverage 4 billion rands in private investment. These are all excellent examples of public-private cooperation and synergies being developed. Encouraging investment. Okay, the cities are going to be very disappointed that you didn't applaud them, Encouraging investment in cities and townships requires initiatives of many arms of government. Minister Sisulu will shortly release a white paper on the reforms necessary to build more inclusive residential property markets and accelerate the upgrading of informal settlements. National Treasury is working with municipalities on measures to reduce the cost of dealing with construction permits, obtaining electricity connections, and the registration of property. The Department of Trade and Industry is leading a similar initiative with other departments and agencies to make it easier to start a business, to pay taxes, get credit, trade across our borders, enforce contracts, and resolve insolvencies. Madam Speaker, local initiatives are often key to progress in tourism and the hospitality industry. Ms. Lisa Sheard captured this well in her budget tip. Tourism encourages pride of place, end of quote. Pride of place ensures that water will run, the streets will be clean, and signage will be clear. Ms. Sheard also wrote that, and I quote, tourism is womanful. Women excel and dominate, she says. Tourism instills a good and honest work ethic. It will not make you rich and famous quickly, but it can be very rewarding, she says. With transformation, we will see growth, and growth will strengthen the forces of transformation. Thank Ms. Sheard for her ideas to Minister Hanekom. Thank her, please. I caught him asleep there, you see. As far as health services are concerned, Madam Speaker, the government is moving towards the next phase of the implementation of the National Health Insurance. We are committed to achieving universal health coverage in line with the vision of the National Development Plan. 11 NHI pilots have yielded valuable insights on which we are now able to build further. These include, firstly, the design of contracts with general practitioners, secondly, more effective chronic medicine dispensing, thirdly, strengthening district health services through clinical specialist teams, ward-based outreach teams, and school health services, and supportive information systems. In the next phase of NHI implementation, an NHI fund will be established this year. Its initial focus will be, firstly, to improve access to a common set of maternal health and antenatal services and family planning services. Secondly, to expand the integrated school health programs, including provision of spectacles and hearing aids. And thirdly, to improve services for people with disabilities, the elderly, and mentally ill patients, including provision of wheelchairs and other assistive devices. Well done, Minister Motsoaledi. The service package financed by the NHI Fund will be progressively expanded. In setting up the fund, we will look at various funding options, including possible adjustments to the tax credit on medical scheme contributions, and further details will be provided in the adjustments budget in October this year and in the course of the legislative processes. Taking into account the 160 submissions received from the public, the National Treasury and the Department of Health are working together to revise and finalize the NHI white paper and the long-term financing arrangements while we get the parallel process going. There will be consultations with stakeholders over the period ahead on reform of the medical scheme environment, including, honourable members, the consolidation of public sector funds. Over the next few months, we will work with Minister Motsoaledi, Minister Nzimande, and Minister Patel on planning the Limpopo Central Hospital and the new medical school of the University of Limpopo. Government is committed to increasing investment towards health promotion, targeting non-communicable diseases, alongside the implementation of the sugary drinks tax, such as diabetes screening and nutritional education. An additional 885 million rands has been added to support the implementation of the universal test and treat policy for HIV and 600 million rands for commissioning of the new Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital. Honourable members, the quality of our schools and further education institutions is at the heart of our commitment to our children's future. Improvements have to begin in the foundation phase of education in the education value chain. We will continue to increase resources for early childhood development, improve our basic education outcomes, and step up our support to TVET colleges and universities. Spending on basic education next year will be over 240 billion rands, or 17.5% of the consolidated budget. Allocations for school buildings increase at 12.5% a year. Minister Mutseka requires your encouragement. Spending on learning and teaching support materials increases by 9.5% over the next 3 years. Now, in this context, how are we supporting university students? Government recognizes the needs articulated by students in universities and TVET colleges. As the economy grows, we will be able to do more to finance an expansion in tertiary education opportunities and improvements in student funding. Madam Speaker, in addition to the increase of 32 billion rands we made in the higher education allocations in last year's budget and the 2016 MTBPS, we have added a further 5 billion rands in the outer year of this MTEF. Government has provided funds to ensure that no student whose combined family income is below 600,000 rands per annum will face fare increases at universities and TVET colleges for 2017. All poor students who have applied and qualified for NSFAS awards and who have been accepted by a university or TVET college will be supported. The Hare Commission of Inquiry into Higher Education and Training, established by the President, will complete its work by June this year. The Interministerial Committee on Higher Education, led by Minister Hadebe, is engaging all stakeholders to discuss the various issues affecting this area. Civil society initiatives involving business, churches, and other organizations have created both the space and the opportunity for a diversity of options to be considered. The President has invited stakeholders to participate in these processes that are underway so that all views are heard and all contributions accepted. Given the magnitude of student funding requirements, it is imperative that we find consensus on a clear roadmap towards a better higher education and training system, and a roadmap we're going to need for the next 5 to 10 years. It will clearly indicate how society will achieve access, opportunity, financing, and support for students in the university and further education sectors. Several broad principles assist in finding the way forward and developing this roadmap. Government is determined to address the challenges identified in post-school education and training in a phased manner. Resources will be taken into account in determining the pace with which these can be addressed. Government stands ready to engage with education stakeholders and adapt financing arrangements as may be required in future years within the scope of available resources. Universities, students, and education stakeholders share responsibility for improving access and quality and the diversity of higher education and training provided within a framework of consultation rather than confrontation. A growing contribution is needed from employers and industry through funding of bursaries, internship opportunities, and research programs, recognizing that this is the foundation of future productivity and technology advances in our economy. Together, we will find a way forward that meets student funding needs fairly and sustainably so that rising numbers of graduates can contribute positively to inclusive growth and transformation of the economy. Let's talk rather than fight. Honourable members, social assistance grants provide income support to the most vulnerable in our society. These will be increased in April to compensate for consumer price inflation. The old age grant will increase by 90 rands to 1,600 rands for pensioners over the age of 60 and 1,620 rands for those over the age of 75. The disability and care dependency grants will also increase by 90 rands to 1,600 rands. Foster care grants increased by 30 rands to 920 rands. And the child support grant increases by 20 rands to 380 rands a month. Madam Speaker, allow me to commend the work of the interdepartmental task team led by the Department of Women and Minister Susan Shabangu that is coordinating government support for the provision of sanitary pads to indigent women, including learners and students. The KwaZulu-Natal Department of Education is piloting the rollout of sanitary pads at schools, and I hope we will see complementary initiatives in other provinces as well. On the issue of public procurement, honourable members, public procurement will amount to 1.5 trillion rands over the next 3 years. Let me say that a little differently. We will pay about 500 billion rands a year for the delivery of goods and services as government, not transfers or handouts or cash distributions. The purpose is to acquire the infrastructure and operational inputs required for effective service delivery. Public procurement is also an important strategic vehicle for developing local industries, broadening economic participation, and creating work opportunities. Last month, we gazetted new preferential procurement regulations to achieve the following. Where large firms are awarded tenders of 30 million rands or more, 30% of the contract value must go to small or black-owned enterprises where feasible. Procurement authorities are now empowered to set clear targets to promote black-owned and women-owned businesses, participation of youth and disabled persons, and opportunities for rural enterprises and cooperatives. South African suppliers will enjoy preference in respect of goods with significant local content, thus supporting job creation in South Africa. Madam Speaker, there will be further procurement reforms this year. A draft public procurement bill will be published shortly. It will establish a single procurement authority and will consolidate the currently fragmented regulatory environment in keeping with Section 217 of our Constitution. The central supplier database is now fully operational. It has made doing business with the state much easier and cost-effective. It enables government to know who it is doing business with and to use technology to reduce the opportunities for fraud and corruption. Already large numbers of transactions have been identified for further investigation. Public service employees who appear to be doing business with the state is obviously they are out of order. Supply agreements that reflect the identity numbers of deceased persons, payments to bank accounts other than those of the relevant suppliers. These are all the issues that will be detectable with the new technology. Madam Speaker, in some cases, we will find that there are legitimate explanations for some of the mishaps, but where fraud or corruption is identified, action must be taken. The Procurement Office currently manages 71 transversal contracts covering some 23,000 items worth 61 billion rands. Good progress is being made to find better value for money while expanding and diversifying the number of suppliers. Let me give you some examples. Savings of 675 million rands in 2016-17 on cell phones and vehicle contracts. The vehicle contract alone is expected to save the state between 1 billion and 1.5 billion per year over the medium term. In the property leasing sector, we expect savings of between 2 and 3 billion rands to be realized, while releasing resources for greater employment and contracting in building maintenance and services. Collaborative efforts between CETA and the National Treasury have led to savings of some 2.5 billion rands in the 10 largest ICT equipment contracts. Working with the Department of Basic Education on cost-effective standards for building design, we have reduced the average cost of new schools from 70 million rands for 7,500 square meters to 34 million rands, almost half. I need to emphasize again that suppliers who have met their delivery obligations are entitled to payment within 30 days. Officials, please note. We will continue to monitor progress in meeting this particular commitment. The transformation of the financial sector. Since the global financial crisis in 2008, we, together with our partners in the G20, have been on a long journey to make the banking system safer and prevent the type of economic crisis that systemically important banks can trigger. We responded with a series of substantial, intrusive, and intensive regulations and in South Africa. Cabinet approved the shift to the Twin Peaks regulatory system to make the financial sector safer and serve South Africa better and reduce the risks to South Africa, introducing the following structural reforms to the regulatory system. In 2012, the new Financial Markets Act introduced the framework for unlisted derivatives, which caused so much of the damage in the 2008 global financial crisis, based on the subprime loans. In 2013, the Banks Amendment Act brought in requirements for increased capital and better liquidity management. In 2013, government took steps to deal with household over-indebtedness, starting with abuses in emolument attachment orders or garnishing orders. In 2015, tabled the Financial Sector Regulation Bill to give effect to the Twin Peaks system. As soon as this bill is enacted, we will be able to establish a dedicated market conduct regulator to protect customers and ensure that they are treated fairly. Earlier this year, together with Minister Davies, new restrictions on credit life insurance were implemented, preventing the sale of retrenchment insurance to people without jobs, for example. As an employer, national government has investigated some 135,000 of these garnishee orders against state employees and reduced the number of deductions by some 50,000 at this stage. We hope all employers will assist their employees in the same kind of way, that is, safeguard them from unfair garnishing orders. As we have seen recently with the Competition Commission investigation, there is evidence of a collusive culture and a greedy culture at trading desks in banks. It is precisely to deal with such abuses that we have proposed a dedicated market conduct regulator, and we hope Parliament will pass this bill as soon as possible. Collusion must be stamped out, whether it is in the banking, construction, or the bread industry. But banks need tougher rules to cover financial market abuses, and the Reserve Bank and National Treasury have initiated work on a more comprehensive financial markets review under the leadership of former Deputy Governor James Cross to build on the review conducted in 2014. Although progress has been made in transforming the financial sector, more needs to be done to broaden access through more affordable financial services, improve market conduct, ensure employment equity at top management levels, provide procurement opportunities, and transform ownership. We live in an era, honourable members, of rapid technological change. 3 new banks have been granted provisional licenses, including the Post Bank, and 2 new stock exchanges. Their business models are based on technological innovation, with potential to bring services more cost-effectively to more people. In other words, to reduce charges that we pay to these institutions. I am pleased to announce that we will work with partners at NEDLAC, who have requested that a financial sector summit takes place in 2017 to consider further transformation in this sector. Honourable members, the 2017 budget has been prepared with a view to strengthening both our economic growth and the transformation of our society. This year's budget review sets out our point of departure. And I quote, "To achieve the vision of the Constitution, South Africa needs transformation that opens a path to inclusive economic growth and development. Transformation without economic growth would be narrow and unsustainable. Growth without transformation would only reinforce inequitable patterns of wealth inherited from the past," end of quotation. Although our own transformation imperatives derives from a particular historical trajectory, many analysts have pointed to similarities with social fragmentation and inequality challenges elsewhere in the world. In December last year, the economics profession lost one of its greatest champions of redistribution as a public policy priority. Professor Tony Atkinson was both a leading author and academic in the field of public economics and an expert in the study of distribution of income and wealth in both developed and developing countries. He provided compelling evidence that, in his words, and I quote, "less equality is associated with greater macroeconomic stability and more sustainable growth," end of quotation. He argued strongly for active policies to address inequality. The evidence supports our insistence on a progressive income tax structure, our ongoing work on health insurance and social security reform, our focus on further education and training, and our recognition of the structural and technological dimensions of the employment challenge all find resonance in Atkinson's policy proposals. With an international agenda in mind, he also set out the case for a global individual tax on total wealth, higher official development assistance by rich countries — I hope the diplomatic corps is listening to this carefully — improved access of households to credit markets, and guaranteed public employment for those out of work. These are some of his ideas. On one important reform, we have taken a giant step forward. We've agreed to implement a minimum wage, as the President and Deputy President have announced, of 20 rands an hour with effect from next year. Its implementation will require complementary measures to support workers and employers in vulnerable and low-wage sectors and enhanced assistance to young, unskilled work seekers. We also need to seek progress on social security reform alongside phasing in the minimum wage. Our past efforts have come short of delivering either adequate growth or the social transformation we need. We are at a crossroads in that sense now. We need to act urgently to build confidence and support investment in our economy. We need to bring all stakeholders onto an inclusive growth and transformation path. We have proven that we can change course through negotiation, participation, and partnership. We have the resilience needed to move forward confidently, even in uncertain times. Last year, impetus was given to several initiatives under the leadership of Mr. Jabu Mabuza, as far as the CEO initiative is concerned. A fund to support small and medium-sized enterprises has been established voluntarily by the private sector to the tune of 1.5 billion rands, and that money is in the bank. A youth employment service program has been initiated with the aim of creating 1 million work opportunities over the next 3 years for our young people in private businesses. Strategic interventions to support black participation in agriculture have also been developed. In the year ahead, our focus must be on inclusive growth and a transformation action plan. Bold and ethical leadership is needed from all sectors of our society. In this way, we can all embrace a vision of substantive, meaningful transformation, which will allow us to say, we all own our economy. In our communities, there are strong bonds and powerful traditions of caring for one another. These are wonderful social assets, and I believe that all of us can commit to doing more to make the lives of fellow South Africans better. Of course, obstacles there will be many. We must overcome them. Detractors will abound. This can't work, and that needs this kind of change or the other. Let's disprove them. Negativity inspired by greed and selfishness will try to obstruct this process, defeat the bearers of this toxic ethic. South Africans, wherever you are, you have an important contribution to make to transform our society and economy. Own this process, defend your gains, and demand accountability from all. Be an active agent for change. Umanyano ingamandla, unity is power. So what are the main elements? It's been a long delivery, so let me wake you up. So what are the main elements of this budget? Firstly, while global growth is slightly better, geopolitical and economic uncertainties have increased. Our low growth trajectory provides a major challenge, honorable members, for government and citizens. We need to radically transform our economy so that we have a more diversified economy with more jobs, greater inclusivity in ownership and participation. Our financial situation is constrained, but we have still produced a credible budget, and there's lots of money in the system that we could use better. We need to prioritize our spending better, implement our plans more effectively, and make a greater impact with the money that we have. We need to build the widest possible partnership to promote consensus and action on a program of inclusive growth and transformation. Allow me, in conclusion, Mr. President, to thank you and the Deputy President for your guidance. I would also like to thank Cabinet colleagues and members of the Ministers' Committee on the Budget for their support and cooperation and wisdom. I thank the provincial premiers and finance MECs and municipal mayors who share our fiscal and financial responsibilities.
Point of order.
What's the point of order, Honorable? Please take your seat, Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to call in order. There is no guidance that Zuma gives. that Mr. Zuma gives to the
Honorable
country.
member, that's not a
He
point
must
of
not be
order.
thanked in the name of this
That's
parliament
not a point
or
of
in the name
order.
of the people of South Africa.
Please proceed, Honorable Minister.
As I was saying, we thank our provincial premiers and finance MECs and municipal mayors who share our fiscal and financial responsibilities. My sincere thanks to Deputy Minister Jonas and Director General So my thanks to Deputy Minister Jonas and Director General Fuzile for their absolute integrity and indefatigable commitment to public service. Honourable members of the House, you will join me in expressing our collective appreciation to the staff of the National Treasury, the South African Reserve Bank, the South African Revenue Service, and the finance family institutions. I'm also grateful to the Finance and Appropriation Committees who have responsibility for considering the Division of Revenue Bill, the Appropriation Bill, and today's revenue and expenditure proposals. Honorable Karim, and De Beer is not listening. I paraphrase what I said, Honorable Speaker, in October last year. Fellow South Africans, if we make the right choices and do the right things, we will achieve a just and fair society, founded on human dignity and equality. We will indeed transform our economy and country so that we can all live in dignity, peace, and well-being. This is the time for activists, workers, business persons, the clergy, professionals, and citizens at large to actively engage in shaping the transformation agenda and ensuring that we do have a just and equitable society. We also need to consider, in the face of such intractable economic hardships and disparities, whether we should apply our minds to supplement our constitutional Bill of Rights with a Charter of Economic Rights, a charter that would bind all of us to an economy which provides access to decent and well-remunerated jobs, facilitates training and retraining of citizens in the face of technological changes, and creates a supportive environment for micro, small, and medium-sized businesses and cooperatives. So let's think about that and support that idea and get some consensus in our country as we go forward. Madam Speaker, we can draw inspiration from Nkosi Albert Luthuli in a time like this when he says, and I quote, "I believe that here in South Africa, with all our diversities of color and race, we will show the world a new pattern for democracy. There is a challenge for us to set a new example for all. Let us not sidestep this task," end of quote. That's the responsibility we have. Ours is a collective responsibility, despite many distractions, to live up to the expectations of Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Beyers Naudé, Nelson Mandela, Albert Luthuli, Yusuf Dadoo, Lillian Ngoyi, amongst many others. In this way, we will honor the confidence and trust that our people have put in us. In this way, our transformation efforts will serve all South Africans. In his tribute to the South African soldiers who lost their lives with the sinking of SS Mendi, the poet S.E.K. Mkai wrote, and I quote, "Ukonza nye, ukuze kupile abanye." Somebody has to serve so that others can live. Can we in this spirit say we have built a better South Africa with a more inclusive economy and all citizens living in dignity, advancing economically over generations to come, And that's the question that our children and grandchildren will ask us. As I end, Honourable Speaker, I wish to table this bundle, the 2017 budget speech, the 2017 budget review, including the fiscal framework, the revenue proposals, including customs and excise duties, estimates of national revenue and replies to the budgetary review and recommendations report, the division of revenue bill, the appropriation bill, the estimates of national expenditure. Ngia Bonga, India Bulela, Danki, thank you, Kea Leboha, Nakenza, India Livhua, Ngia Tokoza. Thank you.
All right, there you have it, the 2017 budget speech by Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan. And no major surprises, although there's been calls for a wealth tax. And he started by pointing out that these concerns about inequality, about the rich getting richer while the poor get poorer are fair enough. And he then announced a new tax bracket at about 1.5 million rand. You start to pay 45%, which is almost half of what you earn going back into state coffers. And I think relative to global standards, that is very, very high. We will be speaking to the Finance Minister. I'll ask him about that. Is this now a wealth tax? But what about the poor? And we're just outside Parliament, and I'm joined by Elroy Paulser from Black Sash and Matthew Parks from Kasatu. So a reaction. Let's start with you, Elroy, because you're really worried about those social grants. And just looking at the old age grant going up by 90 rand, disability 90, foster care grant by 30. What do you think of that?
The Minister delivered a very tight budget here to deal within an increasingly constrained political and fiscal space. The increase of 90 rand per month for disability grants and state old age pensions, as we've mentioned before in the previous budget, doesn't keep track with the cost of real inflation for poor people. The basket of common goods shows that food, on which grant beneficiaries spend most of their money, has increased by 16%. So to increase it by inflation.
Things though, Elroy, that's going to come down because the drought will end, we hope, very soon. But I guess you're pointing out something that is interesting, that the poor face a different inflation rate to the rich because they spend more in the shops.
Sure, that's true. Of greater concern to us right now, where we find ourselves, is the issue of what happens to the payment of grants as from the 1st of April. It was all over the media, as you know. There was a meeting this morning in the Old Assembly. The Minister was present. The numbers, how it's going to be funded, whether SASSA will be ready, what it'll cost is of great concern to us. So the thing that sticks in my mind about the budget speech by Minister Pravin was the saying. He said there's not enough money for growth, but he used the term transformation 34 times, and he called for cooperation between various parties, including labor and civil society. And one of the things that really struck me was that when we talk about transformation, it's not about conquering or exploiting or through conflict, that we need to work together now, and that a shared inclusive economy is possible. He also quoted Pope Francis, who said that in order to reform the social institutions that exploit the poor and marginalize them, we need a conversion of our mind and spirit. And I think it's in that spirit that we attended the budget this morning, along with the economists. We are happy to report that many institutions from civil society, with their equal education, the People's Health Movement, the Black Sash, Kasatu, and many others are there. And I think we need to watch what they are saying in the next few days about the spending side.
And he was talking about that coming together. Part of transformation is also looking at the people who are employed, who not maybe getting these grants, but maybe facing a struggle still to get to the end of the month. Was this a pro-workers budget, Matthew?
Look, for us, it's a bit of a business as usual budget. It's a bit disappointing. We have 1 out of 3 workers unemployed long term, and we've seen nothing in this budget which really will create jobs. If we don't resolve the unemployment problem, we can't grow the economy, we can't address our many issues. And we know some departments do excellent work, like trade and industry, economic development, agriculture. But it seems that job creation is left to those departments. We don't have a macro job creation plan. We would have hoped the minister would have said, we've got this plan, we're going to create 100,000 jobs a month. This is the targets per province, per department, per municipality. It seems it's business as usual. For us, that's a key missed
The question
moment.
is it in the minister's hands to say we're going to create jobs? I think he was suggesting that transformation is actually across ministries, across departments. He can't do it in a budget. It has to be about governmental policy. Do you agree?
Part of the problem is that we have some ministers who work and others who are missing in action. We would really expect to see the president.
Which he can't do much about, I guess.
But here he represents cabinet. He represents the collective government. It's not his personal budget. So we don't blame him personally, but we want to see government as a whole. What is the collective approach to dealing with unemployment? So we have some ministers who do excellent work. Ibrahim Patel from Economic Development is doing the best he can. But other ministers, really, we feel they're sleeping on their job. There's opportunities to create jobs across the sector, but we don't see any action happening. And to give you a sense of kind of the irony, we have trade and industry getting the same budget allocation as science and technology. Yet we expect trade and industry to drive the industrialization of the economy, to create a sound economic growth path, and yet we're under-resourcing those key departments.
All right, thank you for your reactions. Matthew from Kusatu, Elroy from Black Sash. Manalisi is on the steps. Let's see if he's got some political reaction for us.
Thank you very much, Francis. As usual, opposition parties are here. They've been listening to the speech. And with me right here is the shadow spokesperson or shadow minister of finance of the Democratic Alliance, Mr. David Maynard. Dave, the minister touched on a whole number of issues with regard to our finances. What's your take?
Well, at the end of the day, as expected, the minister spoke about tax proposals to raise 28 billion rand in additional revenue in the next financial year. But we were disappointed. We thought that the minister should be speaking rather about cutting spending rather than raising taxes. In the next financial year, we will be spending up to 14.3 billion rand on bloated executives and legislatures throughout South Africa. And we think that there is further scope for spending cuts, and that is why we have proposed a comprehensive spending review, so that we can review spending in all three spheres of government, so that we can reprioritize spending over the medium term. That is the only way that we will be able to prioritize funding in order to give opportunities, especially to young people who do not have jobs or have given up looking for jobs in South Africa.
Dave, thank you very much. That is David Maynard, the Shadows Treasurer of the Democratic Alliance. And now it's over to my colleague, Bulelane Phillips.
Well, thank you very much, Manelisi. We're continuing to take political reactions from the various political parties. Up next and joining me is Mr. Steve Swarte from the ACDP. Now, going into this budget, we've seen quite a lot of political parties saying that it needs to be a carefully balanced act. In your view, do you think the minister has done, struck the right notes?
We think so. One needs to bear in mind that he had to stick to the strict fiscal consolidation path to satisfy investors and credit ratings agencies. And we believe he's largely succeeded in that regard. We see that he's kept to the government expenditure ceiling and that the budget deficit is coming in at 3.1%, which we welcome. And of course, there was a 28 billion rand shortage with income tax that had to be raised. And that was a bit of a shock when you see the tax rate at the highest rate increased to 45% for those earning 1.5 million. I think those high earners will then say, well, we need to make sure that every cent we pay in tax is properly spent. And from our side, we've always said we must address corrupt and wasteful expenditure estimated to be 30 billion rand a year. If we do that, then we don't have to tax so many people. And quite correctly, they will then say we need to ensure we get value for every cent we pay in tax.
All right, Mr. Steve Swarte from the ACDP giving his views on what the Finance Minister has delivered this afternoon. We take it back to the other side of the precinct where Manelisi is standing by for more
Thank you
reaction.
very much. Thank you very much, Bulelane. And with me right here is the Secretary General of the ANC, Mr. Kweta Mantashe, who was listening attentively inside here. What's your take, Secretary General?
Manelisi, I think the Minister of Finance tried very hard under difficult conditions. You must remember, the economy only grew by 0.5% in the last financial year. Projection is 1.3% growth. It's not good economic growth. And when the economy is not growing very well, the revenue base is smaller. But the allocations that he has made are carefully considered. Put a lot of emphasis on transformation and emphasize participation in using the term inclusive economic growth. Means participation rather than waiting for delivery. Very important. More important to me was the thought of, yes, put more money on higher education, but the correct thing will be to look through the education system from early childhood development right through, because if we take all the resources and throw them at the problem of higher education and ignore basic education and early childhood development, in the long term, the system is going to collapse. We must put resources on the whole system, the whole value chain. Is quite important to me. A lot of work will be done in the economic development framework and the growth of the economy. Sectors that are identified, SMEs, agriculture, but more important to us is when we talk of money in those sectors, we must know exactly what we want to do with them.
Thank you very much, the Secretary General of the ANC, Mr. Kweta Mantashe. Francis, I'll take it back to you.
All right, let's come back to our studio just outside the entrance to Parliament, and I'm joined by Gulam Balim from Standard Bank, Chief Economist, and Tabi Leoka from Argon Asset Management. So let's start with a quick overview, your gut feel.
I thought it was a good balancing act, given the tough budget that he had to deal with. I think that it heavily weighs on increases in taxes, especially the upper or higher income earners. I think it also was very socially sensitive in terms of the budget that was allocated to education, social protection, health. So again, speaking to the whole radical economic transformation that was so prominent in the speech and also prominent in the State of the Nation address.
It sounded like he really wanted to emphasize that point to show that he agreed with the president and wasn't standing in defiance against the president. First, your overall reaction, Gulam.
So you're correct in suggesting that he sought to show a semblance of unity with the president. His speech was peppered with the word radical at least 5 times, but the minister went slightly further. He was articulate in highlighting this would be a strategic framework, and he in fact gave evidence of government's programs in terms of the broader transformation narrative. So whereas in the State of the Nation address, for instance, the president merely highlighted the areas of economic transformation that he would like to see, what the minister sought to do, and I think quite effectively, was to illustrate the manner in which the budget has for years been and will continue to be a tool for transformation, but it needs to be a tool that's complemented by broader socio-economic and social forces, such as a consensus with business and government and labour for that matter.
All right, I hope you guys can stay just for 2 minutes. Let's just get a quick view of what's happening on the steps just a few metres away from us. Bulelani.
Steps of the National Assembly, where we're doing more reactions from the political parties. Now joining me is Mr. Ngabayomzi Kwankwa from the UDM. Mr. Kwankwa, has the minister struck the right chord, in terms of balancing this budget?
Well, he always tries, but I think the minister was put in a very difficult position by his president when he announced that they would be embarking on radical economic transformation. I mean, in all fairness, there's no fiscal room for him to maneuver insofar as implementing such a program. As a result, there was nothing radical in the budget. But once again, I think what he managed to show us was the indication that to a large extent, the finances of the country are in good hands. I think what he would need, though, is working together with his colleagues in the cabinet, is to say that all the initiatives, whether it's reducing the expenditure ceiling like has done by 10 billion rands this year and 16 billion rands next year, is to say that those initiatives should not be taken at the expense of service delivery. But the other issue, which is also important, it has to do center around the debt levels, the debt to GDP ratio. The only way that they can improve the situation now is by growing the economy, so that they actually increase the size of the economy relative to the debt levels that we have. Because as it is currently, there's no money in the system for him to actually be able to maneuver and implement new programs, so to speak.
Mr. Ngabayomzi Kwankwa from the UDM giving his party's views on their budget speech. We'll now go back to the studio where Francis is standing by.
Thank you. Standing by with two esteemed economists, Gulam Balim, Matabi Leoka. Gulam, let me start with you this time. 45%, a new tax bracket. This is what I'd like to ask the Minister when he comes and joins us. That's pretty high. Is that, in effect, a wealth tax?
It will capture about 103,000 taxpayers. So in that respect, it's not blanket. Certainly you could judge it as a wealth tax, and to the extent that they've also adjusted the dividend withholding tax, it prevents any arbitrage between income and wealth management. But this is in line with the progressivity of South Africa's taxation, where those who earn higher incomes, who have greater source of wealth generation, will pay more. And in that respect, it also is not too penalizing on economic growth, to the extent that your higher income earners have a higher propensity to save and a lower propensity to spend relative to lower or middle quintile income individuals. So it was a balancing act of suggesting we need near 30 billion rand of additional revenues. 15 billion rand of that additional need will be harvested from personal income tax, and by raising the, as you say, the threshold to 45% for individuals earning above 1.5 million rand, that in its own right will probably harvest about 4.5 billion rand. So it was necessary, it was unavoidable, and it's the least damage to growth.
Do you agree with that? Not too damaging, and I guess part of what we were talking about earlier, an array of initiatives.
I agree, because I think that the higher income bracket, especially those who are earning above 1 point or 1.5 and above, are the ones who can take on, you know, an increase, whereas the rest of the population cannot. And we did discuss earlier whether something like a VAT would be appropriate. And given that, you know, we're talking about closing the inequality gap, talking about radical economic transformation, I think this is more in line with the radical economic transformation versus if you had to apply a VAT, which is would affect everyone, including the poor. And again, because it's you know, the budget, I felt that it was very focused on the social aspect of the economy, that, you know, having a VAT versus increasing on that higher income would not be appropriate.
Okay, so taking from the rich for the poor is a bit of a Robin Hood today.
It is a bit of a Robin Hood, but you know, if you look at the economy right now and look at the constraints that that the finance minister is faced with, we are still lowering the ceiling, the spending ceiling, but at the same time we're not collecting enough tax revenues because of you know, feeble growth. So where is he going to get revenue from, or bridge the gap between the shortfall between, you know, expenditure and tax revenue, or slowdown in collection of tax revenue? It would definitely have to be the increasing in taxes on the upper end.
Okay, so talking about that new tax bracket, if you're earning above 1.5 million rand, which I think some of those parliamentarians earn, and there wasn't much applause actually when he announced that. Pravin Gordhan said, please clap for this initiative. All right, Manelisi, on the steps of Parliament for among the politicians and other invited guests. Manelisi, who are you with?
Thank you very much, Francis. Among business people here, we also have businessmen and bankers. Right here with me is Colin Coleman from Goldman Sachs. Colin, you are listening to the minister. Did he touch all the aspects we're intending to?
I think Minister Gordhan did an outstanding job of balancing the social, economic and fiscal imperatives of South Africa. And essentially the message is he held the center for South Africa, and the job he's doing of guiding South Africa through stormy weather, notwithstanding low growth, and high expectations is a fantastic job. And this was evidence of that balance that he is achieving.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coleman. You hear it there from the bankers. I'll now take it on the other side to Bulelane Phillips.
Well, thank you very much, Manelisi. On this side, we're still continuing with the political reaction. Now joining me is the National Freedom Party Chief Whip, Professor Nhlanhla Khubisa. Basically, this budget actually comes amid a climate. Do you think it's had an impact in terms of how the minister has balanced the books?
Well, we believe that the minister is tried by all means to come across and to surf across a very violent tide, a very violent wave. It's difficult because to do the checks and balances here and there. We've got a very ailing economy in our country, economy that is very sluggish. And the issue in our country at the moment is how you grow jobs, you fight poverty, you fight unemployment. That means that more money must be in the pockets of the poor of the poorest. How do you do that? You must make sure that they get jobs, make sure that you grow the SMMEs, make sure that you have more youth employed within the SMMEs, make sure that you grow the townships, make sure that those informal settlements get more money in order for them to grow. You try to level the ground that is investor friendly in our country, and make sure that you grow the urban and the rural industrial development, because that is very pivotal insofar as growing the economy is concerned. But the most important thing that we feel is important for the National Freedom Party is the issue of education. You need to invest as government to basic and also higher education. At the moment, we have about 53,000 of our youth who have been rejected by NSFAS. We don't believe that 32 million is enough. We believe more money must be injected into higher education. They don't have accommodation, and that is very serious. TVET colleges must be upgraded. The curriculum must be upgraded. We must have more people. Align that with the work situation, a partnership with TVET colleges and the work situation. So that, to us, that is very important. And the issue of poverty is an issue that is destroying our country. We believe that more people, so that we don't have more people who are paying, only a small fraction of our people who are paying tax. We need more people pay tax. The 28 billion that is focusing only to the small majority, and the work and the economy, which is 75%, which is only concentrated on 10% of our population, 75% of our wealth. Things must be reversed as fast as possible by creating jobs for our people.
All right, Professor Nhlanhla Khubisa there from the National Freedom Party, giving us his party's views on the budget speech. We're going to cross again to Manelisi on the other side of the precinct.
Thank you very much, Bulelane. I'm now joined by the leader of EFF Plus, Dr. Peter Groenewald. Dr. Groenewald, out of, given the circumstances, do you think the minister has struck all the right chords?
Well, he addressed most of the issues, but of course we must understand that he didn't have much space to move. What is worrying is the fact that we have a 2.2 trillion debt of the government. It is more than 50% of the GDP. And we're talking about 169 billion interest annually. So everybody knows that if your debt is so much more than your income, then you're going to have problems in future. We are disappointed in the fact that they have increased personal income tax. We are of the opinion that they should have increased the VAT, even if it was 0.5%. And we must remember, the basic products for food and everything is exempted from VAT. So the poorest of the poorest would have not been affected by that. But if you increase VAT, you broaden the tax base. We can't get and have the situation where 5 million people are paying for 55 million people.
Thank you very much. That is Dr. Peter Groenewald of FF+. I'll now take you back to Bulelane.
All right, thanks once again, Manelisi. And now going forward, we're going to speak to the leader of the economic freedom fighters, Mr. Julius Malema. Mr. Julius Malema, does this budget, is it radical enough?
Well, it's not radical enough, but you will appreciate that Minister presented a budget at a time when our country is confronted with difficult economic conditions where growth is very low and there hasn't been enough generated for government to distribute, particularly to poor people. But we are happy that even with those limitations, the minister tried his level best to allocate more to the poor and want to punish the rich. If you look at the type of taxes imposed on those who are rich, we are more worried about the collection of corporate tax, because corporate tax has declined by 3%, which is a clear indication that business is not contributing enough, and it's an evidence enough as well that there is too much tax avoidance by corporate sector. We need more radical policy which will deal with tax avoidance, and we must ensure that government establish state-owned companies which will generate more for our fiscus.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Julius Malema, the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, giving us his party's views on the budget. We'll cross back to the studio. Francis.
Thank you very much. And I'm joined by the Finance Minister himself, Pravin Gordhan, finishing a budget speech 2017 a short while ago. Thank you for joining us, Minister.
Thank you for having me.
You've targeted the rich to feed the poor, 45% for people earning 1.5 million. That must be one of the highest in the world.
Not at all.
I'm not sure.
Not at all. So I quoted, if you remember, Professor Atkinson. And one of the things, he's the expert now late on the questions of inequality and income distribution. And he would say go up to 65%. In very different circumstances, in Scandinavia at some stage, income tax was 75%. But this is not about targeting. This is about a fundamental principle in our tax system, but also, let's call it, in our development framework. And that is that the tax system is the key mechanism through which redistribution takes place, not only in South Africa, but all over the world. And today, you live in a world where both in a developed and developing context, your top income groups accumulate a lot of money for themselves, and the middle and lower ends of the economic scale are actually disadvantaged quite seriously. So in a society like ours, where you have such huge inequality, high levels of poverty, and in a sense, operating in a kind of distress zone, a redistributive tax system is at the heart of our financial system.
Would you say this is a wealth tax?
No, it's not a wealth tax. We used to pay much higher taxes in South Africa pre-1994. And it was under Minister Manuel, when I was on the other side of the equation collecting taxes, that as we generated better compliance in the country, more revenue came in, the economy was running at 3-4% at the time, and he was then able to get less of a reliance on personal income tax. We're now living in a more constrained global and local economic environment. We need to still balance our books, because we made certain decisions in 2009-10 that despite the loss of 50 billion rands of revenue, we must not cut down on any of our social services. And the rich should be very happy, because what we are doing is to ensure that people have some basic level of social grants, employment programs, and other forms of health and education services that is provided by our fiscus until people can find employment and look after themselves. So this is the nature of South Africa. It's regrettable that we had to do this, but at the same time, we're doing two things. We're saying the better off in South Africa have to extend their solidarity to the less well off. And secondly, we're also saying that we need to transform our economy so that we actually create better opportunities for people, so that they don't have to depend on the state in any way.
We were noticing that not many of the parliamentarians clapped for that, and they're actually in that bracket.
No, they're actually a little bit lower, depending on how long you've been in Parliament.
Okay. VAT, a lot of debate before this budget. Was it just too politically hot? Because some people are saying we're being precious, you can zero rate a whole lot of goods to protect the poor, even catch the tax dodgers. Was that somewhere you just felt you couldn't go?
No, we had asked the Davis tax panel to look into the question of VAT. Firstly. Secondly, VAT is well known as a regressive tax. In other words, poor people get affected more negatively.
Even if you zero rate a lot more
and
goods.
Thirdly, we do need to revise our zero-rated list, if you like. So we're talking about a fundamental change in the VAT system plus an increase in VAT rate. But where you are absolutely right is South Africans will have to get used to the idea that a VAT increase might well come. But let's give ourselves time, let's debate it, And South Africa has one of the best VAT systems in the world, by the way. And the way we get to the best VAT system in the world is to have the least number of zero-rated or exempt items. Because you create a lot of complication once you have long lists there.
Okay.
And the wrong people begin to benefit in a sense. So we will certainly study that well, take it into the public domain, let people understand what is VAT about and what would a VAT increase do. We had a number of tips, by the way, which said have a dual VAT system. So for luxury items, luxury cars, for example, or yachts, have a higher VAT rate than for ordinary items that you might actually want to consume. So let's look at all of those issues.
All right, and then another issue that you touched on a lot, transformation. Do I read into your speech correctly that this really isn't only in your hands, that this is about a range of policies across departments, across ministers? Some would even say a lot of those tools for transformation are already there. Land redistribution, say.
No, yeah, and what we are saying here is that firstly, let's all agree that the current levels of inequality and poverty and unemployment are just unacceptable. Secondly, that there's, similar to the rest of the world, a disenchantment amongst lower middle classes and the working class and the poor with people who are sitting here and elsewhere, including yourselves, by the way, because we're slightly better off than they are. Thirdly, therefore, maybe the third factor is our economy still looks pretty much like the old economy. Mining is still a significant factor. Manufacturing hasn't moved into more innovative areas just yet, and new opportunities need to be found. So transformation isn't just about taking from somebody and giving it to somebody. It's about fundamentally changing the way we do business in South Africa and asking ourselves, in 20 years' time, what will technology do to jobs? And already people are predicting that the word job is going to mean something completely different at that time. So if you are 40 years old or 45 years old, I want to ask you your age right now. At that time, the questions that are being asked in the Western world where technology is kicking people out of jobs is, what are you going to do with a 45-year-old? How are you going to retrain them? And then there's artificial intelligence that's taking over the jobs of human beings as well. So you've got the technology, artificial intelligence, but the second is that we need to learn to compete a lot more aggressively in the world market. So what is it that we're going to produce, at what cost, that other people actually need, let alone South Africans themselves? So transformation is a much wider issue, and of course there's the issue of ownership and management within the economy, which is related to our past. So let's all buy into it, because don't get distracted by what transformation means for some people and doesn't mean for others. We need to change the way we are so that we have a better prospect for future generations. And let's all share ideas on how best we can do it, and can we get agreement as we would like, labor unions, business, civil society and government, on what is the minimum shape of any transformation program. And finally, we come up with the idea of a Charter of Economic Rights. You can't live in a world where you have millions or if not billions of people who are just going to remain permanently disadvantaged and permanently out of an economic system. At the same time, we'll complain, like some of your commentators, that we have a very narrow tax base, 5 million people out of 55 million people. Well, if you want 5 to grow to 15 or 20 million people, then the nature of the economy needs to change. And that's what this is about.
It sounds like you're very committed to transformation, but this follows reports that you were accused by the president of trying to block transformation.
Politics, we separate politics from fact, you see. So all sorts of things will get said within a political environment. This is a sincere effort after working for about now with the business sector and the trade unions to say, and taking account of global developments. I mean, look at the World Economic Forum documentation on inclusive growth. It'll sound like we wrote it, you know, from our kind of political perspective. But the reality is that so-called captains of business and industry and political leaders in the developed world are semi-panicking because they don't have answers on how will the current models of their economies and businesses look after those that are on the margins. So I think leave the political polemic aside. The question is, do the facts, the reality and the statistics tell us we need to change South Africa? so that all 55 million people can benefit. And if we believe in that, as we do, then let's build an alliance of forces that are going to actually make it happen.
Minister, I'm sure you'll expect one more political question, because you've had to answer this question over and over again. There's been a lot of political buzz around this budget. South Africans are asking, will this be the last budget that you present?
But you know, the simple political answer is that we serve at the pleasure of the President. So,
can you let us into your confidence, though, and tell us if you know of plans to remove you personally?
well, you hear gossip, but that's about it. And we are serious people in the National Treasury. We have a national responsibility to produce budgets like the one we have just done, keep the country on a steady path, and make sure that financially we don't fall off the cliff, because that's going to be having huge consequences for future generations. And we have a fantastic group of professionals in the Treasury and other institutions that are related to the Treasury who are committed to making this country work. And that's been our focus for the last few weeks. Now we'll worry about the politics later.
So my final question then, because you were asked this morning, if you do go, is Treasury the strong institution that can carry us on the path, the chosen path? Could that path even change?
Well, look, no individual is indispensable. None of us sticks to our job forever. Right? And secondly, there might well be a better person. But it's not about one person. It's about teams. Working together, whether it's a team of cabinet ministers or the team between the bureaucrats and the political office bearers. And if people come with the right integrity, with the right ethical framework, and with the common intent in terms of continuing to work in the interests of the country, you know, none of us is going to stick around forever.
Thank you very much.
You.
Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, just after his budget speech. And yeah, we can't get away from the politics around this budget, and the politicians are just meters away from us on the steps. Bulelane, who are you with?
Well, I'm sure all departments were hoping for additional allocation for their resources, but one person who must have been looking closely is a Higher Education and Training Minister, Minister Blade Nzimande. Minister, an additional 5 billion rand in the outer years of MTEF, does that go enough in terms of addressing the issues at higher education?
It's a significant contribution because it comes on top of the 32 billion rands that was allocated last year. So this is additional to that 32 billion. It really goes a long way in addressing particularly your NSFAS students. It does two things, in fact, the budget statement, the budget speech today. Firstly, it's taking us closer to really covering as many NSFAS qualifying students as possible. In fact, a significantly increased number. But secondly, it's a very firm commitment from government and a roadmap to say, we are doing this, but at the same time, we are aware that there is still a commission that must finish its work, but government is committed to actually address the issues that were being raised by the students. So there was a very firm commitment on that score, and there is no doubt that the minister is saying government will address this. But what is important, because there are lots of debates and discussions as to how this should be done, let's commit to further engagement by all the stakeholders.
All right, Dr. Blade Nzimande, Minister of Higher Education and Training, giving us an analysis of what we expect in the higher education landscape. And for more reaction, we're going to cross back to Manelisi on the other side.
Thank you very much, Bulelane. I'm now joined by the leader of the IFP, Prince Mangwasu Buthelezi. Prince Buthelezi, the minister did quite a very reasonable balancing act, I mean, given the circumstances, our financial circumstances. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, because in the circumstances where economic growth is slow, and when, in fact, even global economic growth is slow, which impacts on us, clearly it was a magnificent balancing act that he managed. Although it doesn't make our situation better in the sense that we're going to have more employment, but the budget speech, in fact, showed us that we have a long road to go before we turn around the situation, because unemployment, which is a major problem, and poverty in general amongst our people, is not going to be addressed overnight. And so even though you increase the taxes, I could perfectly understand that, because often we say about government revenue that is taxpayers' money. Clearly then indicate if there's less money than we need, it's only us who can replenish it. So previously he was a very good Minister of Finance, and in fact I cannot understand that anyone who has got the interests of our people in South Africa should be bothering him, as we see so much in the media, people wanting to topple him and so on. I don't know whether such people can be called responsible from my point of view, because you remember, even when he was returned, the markets reacted, precisely showing that right through the population and in the international community that he is actually regarded very highly. So I believe that even the projections of last year were not exceeded. What is mentioned last year were not exceeded. My only worry, of course, is the corruption, that the money that is set aside, the major thing is that all this money we heard about today will end in some people's pockets instead of addressing the suffering of our people. That's the only pain I have about today. But otherwise, from the point of view of performance and looking around at the circumstances, I don't think that anyone else would have done better than Minister Provincial Gordon did.
Prince Buthelezi, thank you very much. That was the leader of the IFP, a little bit worried about uncertainty surrounding the position of the Minister of Finance. I'll take you back again to Bulelane Phillips on the other side of the carpet.
All right, thank you so much, Manelisi. We're going to jump straight into it. On my right is the leader of the PAC, Mr. Luthando Mbinda. Mr. Mbinda, this budget, is there anything to celebrate for your constituency?
To be honest with you, there is absolutely nothing. And there has been nothing fundamental, more especially from the budget speech from the minister. He is just telling us about the same thing, about the spending patterns and how much the government must cut on spending, about how much they have allocated. To us, I thought that at least at some point they need to tell us about the means of production which are still in the hands of the white minority. They must tell us about the land of this country which is still under the control of the white minority. They need to tell us how this land is going to be redistributed to the indigenous people. As we all know that when we talk about land, we are talking about the wealth of this country, and it is a gift that we have been given by God as citizens of this country. So all these other issues that he is raising, including education, because we believe as PAC that, you see, this government can afford free education from primary to tertiary level, because to us education should not only be seen as an economic imperative. Instead, it must be seen as a service to this country, because there is a lot when these kids are educated that they can do to improve or to increase the growth of our economy. So what he was telling us, there is absolutely nothing new. He spoke about this radical economic transformation, but we are saying up until such time the land is returned, the wealth of this country, because we cannot have a situation where our reserve bank is privately owned, because a reserve bank is a national key point. It should not be privately owned.
Mr. Mbinda, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. That's Mr. Luthando Mbinda, the leader of the PAC. And we're now going to cross back to the studio. Francis.
Thank you very much. Yes, so we spoke to the minister earlier, and one of the things that I asked him was about that 45%, that new tax bracket, which seems pretty high. It only kicks in if you earn R1.5 million. And let's look at this in detail, because this was mooted as the tax budget. So I'm joined by Deborah Tickle from KPMG, a tax expert. Thank you for being with us again, Deborah. That 45, higher than predictions, isn't it?
Well,
It's interesting, there were many predictions. Some people were saying 1%, some people were saying 5%. If you look at the Davies Tax Committee macroeconomic report, the suggestion was that we would need up to 6% to equal a 3% VAT increase. So I guess the 5% on an excess of 1.5 million rands of earnings kind of evens it out. And it is in line with a number of other countries in the world. We see the UK, Spain, Luxembourg. There are a number of other countries, although many of them have lower corporate tax rates.
Okay, so we're not out there, basically.
Well, the global average is 33, just over 33%.
Right.
That's
so we're
the marginal
significantly
rate.
higher.
We are higher than that. But there are other countries. So I guess one has to look at the package. And the point is that our corporate tax rate is still quite high. And now with the dividends tax rate, it's clearly a political move to say we're taxing those 100,000 people who are supposedly wealthy. And
so explain more. If we're looking at the wealthier in this country, what are the taxes that you heard that will hit them? Okay. So you're talking about extra dividend tax.
Yes, the dividends tax going from 15% to 20%. So that will obviously increase the amount of tax that's paid when a dividend is paid out of a company. And it does make sense in the sense that if we've got 45% for the normal individual's tax, and if we only had 28% inside a company and it was, say, a private company, then there would be no incentive really for a person to draw out. Sorry, there would be no incentive for the person to receive salary. They'd rather receive dividend, because the effective rate there would be about 34. Now it's closer to about 42, 43. So the two rates are very, very similar.
And we've always worried about that, haven't we? That people who have wealth can get wealthier and they're not earning an income, so they're not paying that income.
Yes.
So we're moving to parity, basically.
We are, because if you consider even listed shares, if the shares are held by the individual, then the dividends tax comes out at now 20%. 28% has already been paid. So as I say, it's between 40 and 45% anyway. So whether they receive a normal income or whether they receive a dividend, it's the same effective rate overall.
What would you say to South Africans who are calling for a wealth tax, who are saying that the rich are just gathering too much? It's gone beyond the pale now. Would this, in your mind, be the equivalent of a wealth tax, or could we go so much further but not hurt the economy? I guess that's always the balance.
Yes, I mean, obviously one has to consider that wealth is very mobile, and obviously it would be nice to keep our wealthy people in this country. We do have a number of wealth taxes in the sense that obviously we've now got the income tax being quite high, but estate duty is at a fairly high rate, and transfer duty is very high. It's one of the highest in the world at the highest level, so above 10 million rand, and that's just changed. It's gone up to, it's 13%, so transfer duty is quite high. We do have land taxes, which in the form of rates, the more expensive your house or the more value your home has, the more rates you pay. So we have a number of wealth taxes that people don't seem to identify. When people talk about capital transfer taxes in the sense of paying an amount per annum on your wealth value, that's a very difficult thing to put in place, because the value of a person's wealth can go up or down depending on the economy or the share market.
Or the rand.
Or the rand, yes, exactly. And one can pay. Does that mean that the government has to pay back the times that it goes down? Of course not. So it can be a very difficult tax to administer, particularly because a lot of wealth isn't liquid.
Finally, he seems to have deferred a whole lot of taxes. VAT, we were talking about earlier, very controversial, seems to be signalling that that's down the line. Sugar tax will come in, but it's not yet finalised, and the carbon tax. So a lot of deferment, I guess.
Yes. I think it's right. I think one shouldn't rush into these things, and with the sugar tax, for example, there is a lot of controversy over it. The question of, does it really help to curb health problems, or is it just a raising of cash? So there's a lot still to be considered before it is implemented, but at the end of the day I think it will be.
It is a strange tax, I was saying earlier, because if if obesity is curbed, if people stay away from these sugary things, then you don't actually raise the tax.
Exactly, exactly. And the counter to that is, if that is true, it brings down health costs as well. So it is truly being mooted as being a health tax rather than a wealth tax.
All right, thank you so much for your analysis, Deborah Tickle from KPMG, and we take a short break, and possibly we'll be returning here to Parliament and bringing you more reaction to today's budget speech.
Health Talk unpacks healthy tips to help you to practice healthy living lifestyles.
Now, generally, type 1 is found mostly in children and young adults, and with type 2 diabetes is found mainly in the older generation, and also with an issue of obesity.
Don't have second portions, and then I've brought this plate model to show that for both meals, your lunch, your dinner, half a plate should be vegetables.
Within sports, we see the spectrum itself. Most often we see minor head contact injuries, we call them.
Right.
But certainly in sports, the one that a lot of attention is paid to is concussion.
You see, you've got something, boom, yeah. But it's uncontrolled. Whereas in soccer, when the guy hits the ball, it's controlled. His neck muscles are controlling it. And that's why they say, for instance, in rugby, the training should be to improve your neck strength.
For more on health, join your host, Dr. Selo Motaung, every Saturday from 9 to 10 a.m.
On Network, we tell you about Africa's social media and technology landscape.
21st century economies rely on technology to truly thrive.
We have quite a comprehensive portfolio of interventions in the tech entrepreneurship space.
And Africans are using tech and social media to solve the continent's unique challenges.
App Nigeria is an online marketplace.
Radio Vibe is a social media platform for radio music.
That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time.
Thank you very much, Francis. You'd recall that the Minister of Finance said a lot about the national health insurance, and I'm having here the person who's responsible for that aspect. And I think, Minister, you'll also be happy that we might get even more resources with sugar tax sometime later this year.
Well, sugar tax was not really meant to raise resources, but if it does raise any, that's welcome. But the real aim of sugar tax was to keep South Africans healthy, because the non-communicable disease stemming from sugar are actually exploding in our faces. It's scaring. I've been in the health sphere for 34 years. I passed medicine 34 years ago. I haven't seen so many people suffering diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, and cancer. It's scaring. And all of them sugar is playing a very prominent role in there, and so we have got to do something to curtail it. But I think the highlight of today's budget was not really the issue of sugar tax. It was the issue of NHI, our flagship project, where the minister at long last announced that we are going to start the NHI fund, to start rolling out by establishing an NHI fund to help those people who are vulnerable, who obviously are not on medical aid. You mentioned pregnant women, the youth, school kids, to deal with their physical barriers to learning of eyesight, hearing, and oral hygiene or speech. And you mentioned the elderly, the disabled people, and people with mental disabilities. And that's very exciting, because he then even mentioned where we are going to get the money from. He said we must review the tax credits. And I've been trying to bring out this issue of tax credits into the public. People don't know what it means. Rich South Africans who are on medical aids every year get huge amounts of money back into their bank accounts for belonging to a medical aid, and that is called tax credit. It's as big as 20 billion rand per annum. And he said we can use part of that money to establish this fund to help the vulnerable of our country. That's very, very progressive and powerful, and that's why I'm so excited about it.
Thank you very much. That's Minister of Health, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, talking about the National Health Insurance. Right now, let me take you back to my colleague, Bulelane Phillips.
Well, thank you so much, Manelisi. Obviously, a lot of people have been watching this budget speech closely. One of those people is Mr. Mzwanele Manyi from the Progressive Professionals Forum. Mr. Manyi, does this budget actually address the issues that you've been campaigning for over the past couple of months?
Yeah, definitely not. In fact, for us as Progressive Professionals Forum, we're extremely disappointed with this budget. We think it is a white monopoly capital pro budget. White monopoly capital does not have to pay 1 cent more corporate tax than they've been paying. Poor individuals are going to be settled with an additional 45% of tax, those that are at 1.5 million and above. What that means is that the emerging black middle class is going to be severely punished by this budget. The 1.5 trillion rand that the minister spoke about, that the government is going to be spending in the incoming financial year, that 1.5 trillion, beg your pardon, is also going to benefit white monopoly capital, because it's going to be spent using the triple PFA.
We seem to have run out of time, but we'll take you offline. Mr. Mzwanele Manyi from the Progressive Professionals Forum giving his view on what they thought of the budget. It's back to you, Francis, in the studio.
Thank you very much. And we're almost closing out here. We've been coming to you live from Parliament. Compared to the scenes that we've seen at the State of the Nation, it's been a beautiful day, a little protest outside, but very peaceful. And this was a tax budget as expected, 45%, a new initiative for the top tax bracket. The Finance Minister joined us. He's faced a lot of questions about his future. He couldn't say if it's his last budget, but he said what's needed in this country is leadership. I'm sure a lot of South Africans would hate to see him go, but that's just the political buzz around this budget, which will continue. It's over and out from us at Parliament. Ciao.